All right. Well, hey, I think is everybody who needs to get in as a panelist in? I think so. So we're at the top of the hour now. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Um, Steve, I can let you say a few words if you'd like as well here.
Sure. I just want to say, as Adam was saying, thank you everyone for coming. Thanks to Brandon for an awesome presentation that he's about to give. Thank you to ILM, Jason, for your continued sponsorship and awesomeness. And thanks to everybody for coming out tonight and joining us for this great presentation. And then, Adam, do we have any talking points or?
Yeah, so just a few things. I'm not sure what would happen if this did happen, but as I think some of you are aware, those of you who are in the Twin Cities area here, Minneapolis, St. Paul, there are some nasty storms going through, and I don't know what would happen if Steve or myself or Jason got knocked off, what that would do to the rest of you. But just in case that happens, that it might be due to the storms. Item number two, we've done this the last few times we've had these Zoom meetings. Does anybody have any job opportunities that they'd like to share, or would you like to say that you are looking for employment? And feel free to unmute or go in the chat, or Jason, if you've got some, feel free.
I've got two. Neither of them are Xamarin, sadly. One is we're looking for a really strong JavaScript tech lead. So to lead a team, we are fresh out of tech leads at ILM, and we could use someone very strong, fully remote, as all things are. Eventually, it will be in downtown. So that's one. The second is fully remote for the next 3 years. It's on a project which we've already got 8 people on. It's a really great project. We're looking for either a very strong .NET Core or a very strong Angular. So this project is big enough that we have, although we have a lot of full stack developers at ILM, we are looking specifically for someone who's very strong either in .NET Core or in Angular. This is a long-term project. Of course, I would love for you to come work for me in either of these opportunities, but if you wanted to stay 1099, we can entertain that as well. So we work with a few folks who want to remain independent. We're totally fine with that. So, but those are 2 opportunities that I have at present. So if anyone's interested, so message me. I'd be happy to chat with you guys more. So.
Excellent. Anyone else? Not seeing any hands. Some of you probably already saw, I realized that my current events was up on my other screen that I'm sharing here. So as far as current events and news items, how many of you saw all the controversy this week with the Hey app that was going through the fiasco with Apple's paywall structure? I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. So I guess just to kind of give the backstory that I know, there is a new app called Hey, and I believe it's supposed to be some new innovative way to do email in a mobile app. I did not download it. I did not look at screenshots. I did not watch the video, the how-to, all that. But more or less what happened, and I should mention too, this is by a large company. I think it's the same people who did Basecamp. They put together this app, and they had users registering and paying for it outside of any mobile application, especially iOS. And they were doing all of that through like a web interface. And then you had to be already signed up once you got into the mobile app. And Apple, of course, wants their nice cut of that through in-app purchases. And after Apple had already allowed this through and accepted the app on their whatever first version, on a new update release that was being reviewed, they rejected it. And the main, I'm guessing it's like the head of technology or maybe the owner, was really pissed, and probably rightfully so, and just laid it all out on Twitter. And it was a huge, huge thread, and I read every message, and I feel their pain. I feel bad for them. I mean, in some respects, I've been through some painful points with Apple, and some of them got worked out and some of them didn't. So it is part of their guideline that they make you do this. Not that I agree with it. So I don't know. It's going to be kind of interesting. I'm not sure if this is already gotten resolved or how they're going to handle this. But I saw the latest I heard was that Apple actually announced that that app should have never made it through in the first place. But of course now it did, and now there's this huge uproar. But that was item number one. Did anybody else? Is there anything beyond that that I just said that is more up to date?
So my favorite part to that story is EU, or the European Union, is currently investigating Apple with antitrust allegations. And so it's just this perfect storm of like, here's exactly why you need to be investigated as an antitrust while they're being investigated. So it's just this, like, you couldn't have timed it any better.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess the other part I didn't add was, a service like Basecamp, I think even Netflix, Spotify, they already bypass this Apple paywall by doing the exact same thing. So I think Hey just thought that they could do the exact same by not ever mentioning, purchasing outside, signing up outside. They just, assume that you have to have, this registration and payment happen elsewhere first, that they could get through still. But Apple is being a bit more stringent nowadays, it seems like. So they might not get their way, and I'm not sure if that'll be the end of Hey, at least on iOS. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned. Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to point out was Xamarin.Forms 4.7 was released, and I briefly read over the blog that mentioned this. The one thing that I saw that I'm super excited about was there's a new way to define your column and row definitions in XAML. So rather than having like row definition, column definition, etc., you can define it all on one line just with a comma separated list, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, check out Xamarin.Forms 4.7, and I think that was all I had on my list. Does anybody else have any tech news events to share? Yeah.
The only events I have to share is that on July 9th, we're going to have Jeff Brand from the Microsoft Technology Center. He's going to have a take on Blazor. And then in August, I think we have Abel Wong coming. Many times spoke at MDC on DevOps. So he's going to be coming in August. So just a little cross promotion. I hope you guys don't mind over on the .NET user group. So.
Oh, yeah.
So
excellent.
Cool.
Very cool.
Anyone else?
All
Well,
right.
I think that'll do it. Without further ado, Brandon Minnick, the Code Traveler, please take it away. Feel free to share your screen and get things started. We're excited.
Sounds
Great.
good.
Thanks.
Go ahead and take control. There we go. And we'll just share the desktop. And Adam, let me know when you can see it, and we'll get rolling.
I can see it. Everybody else looking good too?
Yep.
Great.
Absolutely.
Right on. So, yeah, I've got some slides. I've also wanted to do a shout out to Xamarin.Forms 4.7. So I've got some goodies to talk about there. But yeah, basically what we'll do today is run through some slides, talk about what's going on with Xamarin, what's going on with .NET MAUI. And then I also have the MAUI source code up that we will be diving into. So the first half is talking about everything, and then we'll jump into the code and we'll see how everything works. And then, yeah, kind of depending on the timelines and how much everybody, or how many questions that everybody has and how much everybody wants to keep digging, I'm more than happy to hang around. But yeah, let's kick it off. So on the bottom left, or on the bottom of the slides, you'll see a couple links. These are on pretty much every slide today. So on the bottom left, that is my Twitter handle. So if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. That is the best way to get in contact with me. I hate email. Speaking of Hey, the Hey app and reimagining email, I wish email had gone away a long time ago. But yeah, feel free to, if you have any questions, shoot me a message on Twitter. My direct messages are always open. Always happy to chat about Xamarin and .NET stuff. And on the bottom right of the slides, that's a link that I put together, or a webpage I put together rather, for us just for this today. So this is where you can find the slides I'm presenting. I also have a link to a different recording, but I see we're recording this as well, so I'll make sure to include this link once this one's gone live. And also on that page are links to more documentation. There's some really good videos. James Clancy, one of the Xamarin engineers, did a 2-hour deep dive of nothing but .NET MAUI live during build. And that's where I learned a ton. And so if you're interested in learning about more about Xamarin, MAUI, what's coming, check out that link, share it with your friends who maybe couldn't make it tonight, and you can check out all of the resources for learning more about it. So I do want to start with talking about Xamarin.Forms, and like we were chatting about just a minute ago, because we did release a new version of Xamarin.Forms, and actually these slides are immediately out of date because 4.7 hit stable today. My slides still say they're in preview, but I want to share with you some of my favorite features in 4.6, 4.7, and what's also coming in 4.8/5.0. And I know it sounds weird because it's like, hey, wait a minute, we're supposed to talk about .NET MAUI today, and I promise we will. But the timeline around .NET MAUI is still about 1.5 years. And so what do I mean by that? Well, .NET MAUI is coming in .NET 6. And if you've been staying up to date, you'll know that we still haven't even released .NET 5 yet. So .NET 5 is currently in preview today. That'll be released to general availability later this year. When .NET 5 when we take the preview tag off of .NET 5, that's when we'll introduce .NET 6 with the preview tag on it. So not until later this year, probably around November 2020, will any of us be even able to start playing around with MAUI or building a mobile app in MAUI. So until then, well, actually, so let's continue on. So November 2020, .NET 6 preview. November 2021, .NET 6 is scheduled to release its long-term stable. So just the same way we have LTS version of .NET Core 3.1, or the same way .NET Core 3.1 is the long-term stable or long-term supported LTS version of .NET Core 3. We're forecasting that for November 2021 for .NET 6. And so that's kind of the cue to like, that's go time, right? Like that's .NET 6 is ready. It'll be supported for literally years. Make your apps, push them to the App Store then. And so what's happening with Xamarin is Xamarin.Forms is still going to be the de facto framework. It's not going anywhere. We're still working on it. We're still adding new features to it. And the timeline right now for Xamarin.Forms is it's still the de facto framework up until .NET 6 is released, the long-term stable. And then about either 6 or 12 months after .NET 6 has come out, we're still actively working on Xamarin.Forms. After that, it hits essentially maintenance mode. So bug fixes, all the new features will be coming in MAUI. That being said, here's some cool new features in Xamarin.Forms 4.6. One of my favorite ones is this one called Expander. So if you ever had a UI where you wanted to display more information, but it kind of cluttered up the user interface, well, this Expander view allows you to have that information there, but it's only revealed once the user taps on it. So you tap on the header and the body is unraveled below. So you don't have to worry about necessarily cluttering up your UIs. And the cool thing is all this animation stuff, it's all just baked in. I got to play around with it pretty recently and it was so surprisingly easy to use. Radio button is another big one in Xamarin.Forms 4.6. This one sounds like it shouldn't be a big deal, but I'll tell you why it is. This is a big deal because this is the first time we've released something that isn't a native control on one of the platforms. So what do I mean by that? Well, when Xamarin.Forms was first created, it contained all of the controls that existed on both iOS and Android. So if you picture that Venn diagram where that overlap happens, where both iOS and Android have buttons, both iOS and Android have labels, they just call them different things. They call them UI buttons versus Android widget button. Well, all of those overlapping controls that were on both platforms were added to Xamarin.Forms. Well, with radio button, this is a control that exists natively on Android, but it doesn't actually exist on iOS. So iOS, for better or for worse, they want you to use things like a switch or a picker. And when we got the request for radio button, we kind of said, hey, why not? Why don't we at Xamarin or on the Xamarin.Forms team, and I shouldn't say we because I didn't work on the radio button at all. I'm not going to take any credit for it. The engineers did a great job. But what the team did was they made a custom radio button control. So if you dig into the Xamarin.Forms source code, which by the way, it's all open source on GitHub, you'll see that there is no native API for radio button on iOS, and radio button is actually, we'll say, hand rolled. Now, it is still totally native, just like with Xamarin. All the other controls in Xamarin.Forms are still using all the native UI APIs. So it's still a native control, but this one's kind of cool because it's the first step into what I would consider a new world for Xamarin.Forms. Font embedding. This is one of my favorites from 4.6. I've got some code here from, this is actually an app that I recently pushed to the App Store called Get Trends. You'll see probably a couple more snippets from it throughout the presentation. But what font embedding allows us to do is add the font directly to our shared project. So our .NET Standard library, we add the font there. We set the build action to be an embedded resource. And then all we have to do is create this assembly attribute. So I say export font, I pass in the file name, and then I give it an alias. I can name the font whatever I want. I just went ahead and made some constant strings here so I could reference it anywhere and not have to worry about typos. But now what it allows me to do is in my Xamarin.Forms code, I can just set the font family here in my shared code. And again, this might not sound like a big deal, but if you've ever had to use a custom font for a Xamarin.Forms app, it's a pain. You had to add the font to both the resources folder in iOS, the resources folder for Android. You had to write some custom code. Like Android required a custom renderer to get it working. And it was just a pain in the butt. And now with font embedding, we can essentially have cross-platform fonts, and the team did a great job. It's super easy to use. Media Element, it's another cool one. If you want to stream some video, you can use Media Element and it'll play in the native video player. And what's cool there is you can choose to use the default playback controls. So maybe you have a video streaming on the internet, like this video we're in right now. You could stream that in your Xamarin app just by using the Media Element. Or if you want to customize it, there's a lot of highly polished apps that like to have either an animated GIF or a video looping as a background image. Well, you wouldn't want the user to be able to pause that video. So we also, with Media Element, allow you to use custom playback controls so you can hide those play pause buttons, or you can add your own custom buttons that maybe skip back and forth a couple seconds, whatever the user wants, right? And my favorite one in 4.6 is C# markup extensions. So a little background about me, I never used XAML. I joined Xamarin back in 2015. I used to work at Xamarin. That's how I ended up at Microsoft, because they acquired us a little while later. And I was always confused why the whole point of Xamarin is we can make mobile apps in C#. And then you sit down to do your first Xamarin.Forms app and somebody goes, okay, and now here's how you build your page in XAML. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to use it. And not saying it's a bad thing, but I never used XAML before. So if you already had used XAML, yeah, keep using it, go for it. But I chose to create all my UIs, and still do, using C#. And with C# markup extensions, it has become both so much easier and it makes the code insanely more readable. So what I want to show you here is in this grid, new with C# markup is this rows.define method, where we can now give a name to each of our rows and columns. So I've created this row enum and this column enum, and this UI has a couple rows, one called unit type, one called number to convert, a couple of columns, label, and input. And what it allows me to do is when I define the children for my grid in line, I can just say .row and pass in the name of the row, pass in the name of the column. And I can't say enough about how this has made my life so much easier, because before I would just have to know that this dark purple label was in row 0, column 3. And I would just have to remember that that's how I defined it above. And then I don't know if anybody else has made this mistake or if it's just me, but I would always put it in the wrong row and then I'd have to move it, recompile the app, fix it. But now we can name the rows. So not only do I not have to worry about making those typos anymore, but if I'm reading somebody else's code at a glance, I know exactly where dark purple label goes because I know it's in the unit type row and it's in the column label. The other big thing with C# markup is the ability to do bindings inline as well. So now I can, if I want to bind this picker, for example, I can just say bind picker, pass in I want to bind the picker's item source property to the unit type picker list in my view model, and we're done. So it saves so much more code, makes your code so much more readable. And we'll see when we start talking about MAUI and MVU, why this is also really cool as well. All right, so 4.7, yes, this just landed in stable. So you won't, I need to update these slides and remove the preview tag here, but what I want to show off here is, first of all, a shameless plug for my app Git Trends on the iOS and Android app stores. Go download it today. It's just basically a way to monitor your GitHub repos. So you can see your views and clones, how many people are visiting and cloning your GitHub repos, and you can also see where the traffic is coming from. But the reason I want to show this off, aside from the shameless plug, is this image loading placeholder and image error placeholder. So when the user in my Git Trends app taps on that referring sites button, it pulls down the information. This is all from the GitHub API, but what I wanted to do is have a nice little icon here. So I wrote some code that will pull the fave icon from the website. And the fave icon, if you're not familiar with that term, it's that little icon that shows up in your browser bar when you say, like, go to google.com or github.com. So it takes a little while for those images to load because I'm just passing in the URL in my source code. So Xamarin.Forms then has to download the image, cache it. And what's nice with this loading placeholder, error placeholder, is I can give it, you'll see this little green globe here, a placeholder until that image has finished loading. So before I updated to 4.7, this was just blank. It was just a blank, nothing next to the site name. And then if the image failed to load because maybe the user was on a bus and the bus went through a tunnel, so they lost their internet connection, well, the UI just would look broken. But with the loading placeholder and the error placeholder, we can actually have an image appear both while the image is loading, or if the image fails to load, you could use a different or same one. So big fan of this one in 4.7. And multi-binding. This one is huge. So if you've ever had a scenario where you had to bind multiple things to one property on your view, multi-binding is going to save your life. So I hit this problem with that same app, the Git Trends app, because I needed to do a view-to-view binding, and I needed to do a view-to-view model binding for this one is visible property. So I have this, so Git Trends will let you know if your app is trending. So if it's getting more traffic than normal, and if it does, I'll display a little trending tag. We'll send you a push notification, happy days. But we have a large trending tag and we have a small trending tag. And depending on your screen size, I have to choose display one or the other. And so I needed to be able to know what the width is when Xamarin.Forms renders this view. What's its width? Is its width the full width? Did it fully render? And also, obviously, I need to know if that repository is trending. So what I have here is a multi-binding. So we do have to create a converter. So I've got that down here. We'll dive into that in just a second. But what I've done, I've passed in a binding, and this is, you'll notice I don't have a source here. So this is defaulting to the this is defaulting to the default binding context. So this is my view to view model binding. And then I have a view to view binding that's actually binding to itself for the width property. So what we end up doing to say handle the logic is we just inherit from I multi-value converter. And that gives us a array of objects called values. So it's a little weird. I wish it was a little bit more type safe, but what I found is the values in the array are the same or are in the same order that we passed them in here. So this first binding is trending is just a Boolean. And so I know values index 0 is a bool, and then I can cast it and handle it in my logic. Likewise, width is a double. And so I know values index 1 is going to be a double. So I cast that, and then I can determine if the width's valid and whether or not this should be visible. So big fan of this one. I released this app before 4.7 and had to do some crazy things. I was actually like putting things over top of things to hide it and doing all sorts of crazy things. But now we can do multi-binding, so we can have all sorts of different properties coming together for just one binding on our view. All right. So that was Xamarin.Forms. Like I said, if you're making a new app today, keep using Xamarin.Forms because it is the de facto cross-platform UI interface for us Xamarin developers, and it will continue to be until .NET MAUI is released officially, and that's later next year. So late 2021, and then even like I mentioned earlier, after .NET MAUI is released officially, moved it out of preview, we're still going to continue supporting Xamarin.Forms for another year or so after that. So we got plenty of time to still use and enjoy Xamarin.Forms. But at Build, we announced .NET MAUI. So what's going on here? Well, I'm a little biased because I used to work at Xamarin. I love Xamarin. I've got a couple apps in the App Store, all made in Xamarin. But I like to call .NET MAUI Xamarin taking over .NET, because what is happening is, first of all, we are moving Xamarin.Forms namespace from Xamarin.Forms. It'll become system.maui. Likewise with Xamarin Essentials, that'll become system.devices. And so we are essentially bringing Xamarin into, we'll say officially bringing it into .NET. So it's a part of the system libraries now. And what this means for our new projects is in Visual Studio, we'll see a file new template, or I guess a new file new template called multi-platform app UI. That is what MAUI stands for. So yes, MAUI is an acronym. It stands for multi-platform app UI. And we're also going to add in some more CLI support. So if anybody's more comfortable using the terminal and prefers to use the .NET terminal commands, then you'll also be able to do .NET New MAUI, .NET New iOS, .NET New Android. Okay, but why are we doing all this? Let's get everything on the screen. There we go. So the idea behind MAUI is essentially making Xamarin.Forms, or the Xamarin.Forms we know and love, the de facto UI tool for creating, you can basically say Microsoft, for now, mobile desktop UI. And what we're going to do is expand the scope of Xamarin.Forms just a little bit. Right now, iOS and Android are essentially the first class citizens for Xamarin.Forms. That's where all the new features come. And then eventually, as if you've ever used Mac OS or UWP or WPF with Xamarin.Forms, you know, it takes a while for the new features to trickle down and reach those other platforms. Well, with .NET MAUI, and actually, let me show this to you in the browser, because yes, .NET MAUI is open source. So we can check out its GitHub repo right now. And what I want to show you, let's make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So these are kind of the differences between Xamarin.Forms and .NET MAUI. And what I was getting to is one of the big ones is macOS will be essentially a first-class citizen supported on .NET MAUI. So the idea being that when new features come to .NET MAUI, they'll come to Android, they'll come to iOS, they'll come to macOS, and then also Windows. Now, can't speak for my friends at Tizen, but assuming they continue supporting their platform with .NET MAUI, then they'll be continue to provide the support like they do exist today for Xamarin.Forms. Linux still is right now, like GTK Sharp still listed as a community effort, but I know for me personally, Windows and macOS getting essentially promoted to, or getting promoted in .NET MAUI will be huge because like right now I have people asking me, can I release this Git Trends app? Can I release it on the Windows Store or on the Microsoft Store? And I'm like, well, yeah, I could, but it's not going to have all the features because I'm missing X, Y, and Z. And then same with macOS, people have said, I'd love to have this on my desktop. I could check it out just periodically throughout the day. And I said, I agree. But same story, won't be able to have all the features. So with .NET MAUI, hopefully that all becomes a fragment of the past. The other thing I want to mention is Blazor, because that's usually the next question that pops up is, will I be able to create a web app via .NET MAUI, via Blazor? And we'll say right now we are looking into it. Obviously, I want that as much as everybody else, but we first have to figure out what is possible. And then once we figure out how to do it, then we'll be able to start talking about timelines and implementation. So at least when .NET MAUI first launches, these are all the platforms that we're focusing on. And then we'll say DVD for Blazor, but if you want it, make that known now. Because literally the way the product teams work at Microsoft is they listen to customer feedback. And if customers are adamant about certain features, that's what gets prioritized. And what I want to show you real quick is in the .NET MAUI repo today are just, we'll say tons of issues. And I'll say that using air quotes. These are actually all spec reviews, feature enhancements. This is the way to chat with the engineers today about how MAUI will be implemented. So if there are features you're looking for, or maybe something, just it never really worked properly in Xamarin.Forms, well, let's get that fixed. So we have the time now with .NET 6 not hitting preview until later this year to make these changes. Once it gets to preview, it's going to be harder to make some changes. So highly recommend jumping in, joining the conversation. You can search through to see if some of your burning questions are already being discussed, but this is the place to do it while we still have the time to essentially architect .NET MAUI. Okay, back to the slides, because what's the point, right? Like, why are we doing all this? Well, the biggest reason is because becoming a Xamarin.Forms developer is hard. If you want to be a successful Xamarin.Forms developer, you have to first understand mobile. So you have to understand iOS APIs, Android APIs, the mobile app lifecycle. Last I checked, both iOS and Android have over 100,000 APIs each. So already very daunting, very steep learning curve. Once you have your arms kind of wrapped around mobile, well, now you have to learn Xamarin.Forms. So Xamarin.Forms is a different library. We create our UIs a little bit differently than we would, say, with a storyboard or an Android XML file. So learning this new framework, maybe you're doing it in XAML, so you're learning a new language with XAML at the same time. And then once you kind of get your Hello World app working, and let's say you want to do something like access a platform-specific API. So maybe you want to use Bluetooth on iOS. Well, now you have to be an expert in version of control. You have to know how to use things like a service locator, dependency injection to get from your .NET standard project back into your platform-specific code. And so you can kind of see this learning curve for just making a fairly simple Xamarin.Forms app is pretty steep. And a lot of that is because just mobile's hard in general. But with .NET MAUI, we kind of wanted to reimagine how this is all going to work. So the first big difference is this multi-targeted project. So multi-targeted projects have been around, I think about 2 years now in .NET. That's when they first were pushed or released. And to be honest, I wouldn't say they've become a thing yet. I've seen multi-targeted projects used for a lot of libraries like NuGet packages, like Xamarin Essentials, for example, uses a single multi-targeted project. But there's nobody making Xamarin.Forms app using multi-targeting. But what is multi-targeting? So multi-targeting allows us to have all of our code in one project. So like in this Solution Explorer here on the left, you'll see that there's no separate project for your .NET Standard library. There's no separate project for your iOS library. There's no separate project for your Android library. It's all in the same CS proj. It's all in the same C# project. And the way this works is in that CS proj file, we call out the specific target frameworks that we want to target. So we can see here, we're calling out iOS, we're calling out Android, we're calling out our .NET Standard library. And the way this all works, the secret sauce is actually in the compiler. So what happens is when we compile and build for iOS, the compiler will include all of the shared code and the iOS specific code. When we compile for Android, it will include all of the Android libraries. So basically the compiler almost does this filtering for us. And the way it knows what to include where is by using file names. So for example, here we have Bluetooth adapter.android.cs. So by naming that file .android.cs, the compiler now knows when we compile for this Pixel 3 emulator to include .android.cs and also anything that's just .cs. So like how we have main page or assembly info, those are just CS files, that's shared code. Compiler's going to include all of that for us. And we'll see this in a minute when we dive into the MAUI source code, but this vastly simplifies how we essentially need to architect our Xamarin.Forms projects today, because we don't have to use inversion of control or dependency injection to get to this Android specific API anymore. We can just use partial classes. And I promise I'll show you what all that looks like in just a second. So the other thing with having all the resources in one project, this is something that we're still kind of working on. And one thing that we saw earlier, that font embedding that came out in Xamarin.Forms 4.6, well, that's exactly how we're going to handle fonts in .NET MAUI. So we're essentially leveraging that existing technology. And then there's another tool that you may or may not have heard of called a resizetizer. It's another beautiful name that is kind of in preview today. I think it's available. Yeah, it's available on NuGet, so you can check it out, add it to your apps. But basically, same idea for sharing fonts across different platforms. Resizetizer takes the image you give it and generates the platform-specific images. So like your 1x, your 2x, your 3x on iOS, your HDPI, your XHDPI, your XXX HDPI, your XXXX HDPI on Android. And so that one's kind of still up in the air. But again, check out the GitHub repo, join the conversations because you probably know better than any of us. So let us know what you'd like to see, and we can shape that still going forward for .NET MAUI. All right, so another huge reason for moving to MAUI is performance, and performance specifically from renderers. So the way Xamarin.Forms works, it has what are called renderers that take the code that we wrote in Xamarin.Forms And when we say compile, for example, on iOS, that Xamarin.Forms button gets compiled down into the native UI button. So you still get the native UIs, even though we're using shared code. And the way that works, the engine behind that are called renderers. And so it works. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, Xamarin.Forms is able to do that today. But there's a couple problems that we can't really fix without starting over in Xamarin.Forms, and .NET MAUI gives us that unique opportunity to do this. And one of those problems is consistency. So if you've ever made a custom renderer for Xamarin.Forms, you know that there's no contract, there's no consistent implementation between renderers. So the way you implement a button renderer is different from the way you implement a button or a label renderer. And even the difference between doing a button renderer on iOS is slightly different than doing a button renderer on Android. And once you kind of get a feel for it after you've done a couple, you start to realize, okay, well, there's typically a method called onPropertyChanged or onElementChanged. And okay, we can usually just override that and then we're good. So great. You start making your renderers, you're overriding onElementChanged, and then you get to say a navigation page renderer. Well, navigation page renderers don't have that method to override. So now what do you do? Who knows? Well, I mean, in all seriousness, what I do, I just go look at the Xamarin.Forms source code and see like, how are these guys doing it? Oh, okay, that's how they're doing it. And I kind of walk backwards and reverse engineer it for what I need. But right, there's no consistency. It's kind of like the Wild West with renderers. So one of the big things we're doing with MAUI is introducing interfaces for every renderer. So every renderer has to inherit from an interface, and the interfaces define exactly what needs to be included. And we'll show this off in the source code, and you'll see what we mean in a little bit more detail, just a bit. But the other thing that's painful with renderers is performance. So something interesting that we found is, we've been optimizing Xamarin.Forms. Every release gets a little bit faster, but we kind of hit a wall with performance because what we found is on Android specifically, the assembly attributes. So if you make your custom renderer, you put an assembly attribute on the top that tells Xamarin.Forms what it is, how to use it. On Android, those attributes account for half the startup time. And so hopefully we can get, I don't want to make huge sweeping promises, especially as we're still architecting .NET MAUI, but the hope is remove those renderers will unlock huge performance gains for .NET MAUI. And again, we're doing that we will be doing that using partial classes, which I'll show you in the source code. Once we get past this, I think this is the last slide. The other cool things coming on .NET MAUI, Visual Studio Code is being promoted. It'll be a first-class citizen for us. I was about to say Xamarin developers, but we will become .NET MAUI developers. So with Xamarin development today, we're either using Visual Studio on the PC or Visual Studio for Mac. Well, when .NET MAUI comes along, you'll be able to do all the same things in Visual Studio Code, which will be awesome. Combining that with the additional terminal commands will make for a really cool development experience, especially if you're already used to that for your development workflow. C# hot reload's coming. This one is something I'm insanely excited about because, like I mentioned, I don't use XAML. So all my friends get XAML hot reload. That's been out for, I think, over a year now. And I'm still left having to recompile my app every time because all my UI is in C#. Well, the reason we were able to release XAML hot reload such a long time before releasing C# hot reload is the way XAML works versus the way C# works. Because XAML is a interpreted language. So it gets just-in-time compiled at runtime. And because it's not compiled ahead of time, it's really easy to swap out lines of code in XAML well, I shouldn't say it's really easy. It was really hard to get XAML hot reload working. But because XAML is interpreted at runtime, you can swap out a line of your XAML code, and then we can just reinterpret that at runtime. So kind of almost think like you have an engine running in the background saying, like, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Yep. Okay, update the UI. Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Yep, update the UI. Well, C#, specifically Xamarin C#, runs on Mono, and Mono is all ahead of time compiled. And what that means is the compiler boils down all of our C# code into the intermediate language, into the native bits before our code even starts running on the simulator of the device. So what we're left with is there's really no way to swap out C# code at runtime with an ahead of time compiled language. So the reason C# hot reload has been taking so long was the team first had to make a Mono interpreter. They had to essentially start from scratch. Instead of using the ahead of time compiler for Mono that we've been using for decades, had to reinvent it with a interpreter that could interpret C# code at runtime. So it's been quite an effort, and huge shout out to the engineering team for getting this working. But this will be C# hot reload will be included in .NET MAUI. So I'm super excited about that. And also model view update architecture. So today, if you're making a Xamarin.Forms app, you're doing it using MVVM, model view view model architecture. Well, it turns out the rest of the world has kind of moved on from MVVM. Nobody really uses it outside of, we'll say, the Microsoft bubble, and they've moved to this new architecture. Well, say new. It's probably new to us as .NET devs, but it's called Model View Update, and it's just a different way of architecting your app, and it still separates the view from the business logic. So we still get the benefits that we know and love with MVVM, but as we'll see in the demo, we can remove a lot of extra overhead that comes with MVVM. Like, one of the things that I always thought was silly with MVVM is you create your model. Your model has maybe 5 properties in it. And then when you create your view model, you have to essentially recreate the model again. You have to have a property for anything you want to propagate to the view. So if that, if the model we created had a string for the URL and we wanted to display that URL in an image in the view, well, our view model needed to have a public string URL property. And so there's a lot of extra overhead in MVVM that is no longer required with MVU. So super excited about that. And then if, like me, you've been getting into GraphQL at all, there are actually ways that you can build your app without having, well, there's ways you can build your app where your GraphQL backend is your business logic. So your app just becomes purely UI, and then your GraphQL backend updates the UI when things change on the server and the cloud. So really cool possibilities coming with .NET MAUI. And I think that's the last one. Yep, before we do the deep dive. So I tell you what, I think I've been talking for 45, 50 minutes now. Let me go ahead and pause and see what questions does everybody have so far, because we can also answer a bunch of these questions when we get into the code as well. So let's see, let's see, or can I look at the chat while I'm presenting? Where'd my chat go?
You should be able to. I'm
or
not
if anyone wants
seeing
to shout
anything.
out a question in the chat. Nothing in
I
the,
have a
there's the
question.
chat. Yeah, go for it.
So obviously, like right now, whenever we, like 4.6, 4.7, these Xamarin.Forms updates, you go to your NuGet package manager and do your update. Is being that .NET MAUI is part of the system namespace, are we going to be having to make Xamarin, or will there essentially be a system.maui package that we then are updating in the future?
That's a good question, because I actually have the same question myself. So we'll say right now TBD, but that's that's the only way I can imagine it happening. And like I said, there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me, but yeah, if we didn't release it via NuGet packages and then it's in the BCL, well, the BCL only gets updated with Visual Studio updates, or we release new versions of, say, new versions of .NET 6, right? So I don't know if the team would want to do that, because then MAUI becomes beholden to the release cycle of .NET. And so TBD, I'm actually not sure. There might be a discussion about that going in the repo, the MAUI GitHub repo already. If there's not, we should probably spin one up and chat about it. But I would be surprised if we didn't use NuGet packages, but I'm not sure. Good question. Yeah, good question. Now, what other questions does everybody have?
Looks like we had a message. Someone's Wi-Fi died with a lightning strike, so they had to get off. I'm not sure how much they may have missed. Let's see. Anyone else want to unmute and ask Brandon any questions?
Hey, Brendan, Ravi here. I have a question.
Yeah.
I see that MAUI is spelled in all capital letters. Is there an abbreviation behind it, or?
There sure is. Yeah, it stands for Multi-Platform App UI.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, it's funny. Being a Microsoft employee, obviously, I knew about MAUI before we could tell the world, or before we did tell the world at Build this year. And I knew about MAUI for, yeah, I'd say months before I found out it was an acronym. I just thought it was like a cool code name, like codename MAUI. And then, yeah, at Build, I saw that it's actually an acronym that stands for Multi-Platform App UI. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess that makes more sense than just an island in Hawaii.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Right. Anyone else? I'm not seeing any. I think we're probably good to keep going if you're up for it.
Of course. Yeah, let's dive into some code. I should have increased these font sizes ahead of time, but we'll do it live. No problem. Bump that up. Bump that up. Oh. All right. So what I have in front of me here is the .NET MAUI source code. Now, again, caveat with everything we've been talking about today, .NET MAUI is not going to be released until .NET 6 hits preview in November. So things may change. And honestly, any changes that do happen will be for the better, because it's from conversations with fellow developers that tell us how it should be done instead of how we think it should be done. So, all right. So what we have here, this is a renderer. Actually, before we even jump into that, I'll show you. This is the MAUI library. So we were talking about multi-targeted or single multi-targeted project. So if I jump into the CS Proj and edit it here, we'll see that all these different platforms are listed. So Xamarin iOS, Android, Mac, .NET Core, .NET Standard. And so basically what that means is we have access to all of these different APIs here in this one project. And we also talked about, that secret sauce is with the compiler now. So the compiler chooses which files get compiled. And right now, these are all done with compiler conditions. So TBD if this will still be how we do it going forward, because, to be honest, this doesn't look great. Having all these different item groups, it kind of reminds me of the old days before SDK style projects came along, where we had these massive CS Proj files. So this is what we're looking at today, but also it's kind of, we need to get it working with the current tools, because there's also more cool things coming in .NET 6 that will enable things for MAUI. But anyways, this is a multi-targeted project. There's just one CS Proj file here. And where'd we go? Renderers, label, there we go. So what we'll see is we have all these different file names for the label renderer, labelrender.cs, labelrender.android, .mac iOS, .standard, .win32. And so what we're doing in .NET MAUI, and again, caveat, things could change, but what we will be doing as .NET MAUI mobile app developers is also using partial classes. So let me show these two side by side, because that label renderer looks a little empty until you see that it is actually using a partial class. And in the platform specific code, we have a partial class, but this is now able to access all of the iOS specific APIs. So let me show you. So we made this native label just so we could basically share code between iOS and macOS. So for all intents and purposes, on iOS, this native label is just a UI label. But now that we have this UI label, well, we can do anything we want with it, right? So just like we handle renderers for Xamarin.Forms, this is how MAUI handles renderers. And what we have here is, so partial class. So this is technically the same class. When we compile this code, the compiler combines all this code together, and it allows us to do things like creating this property mapper. So before I jump into what a property mapper is, I want to show you that the methods it's referencing, like this map property text, well, when we compile for iOS, that's now referencing this method that lives in the iOS specific partial class. So what's beautiful about this is there's no need to do inversion of control. There's no need to use a service locator. We don't have to use IOC containers. I mean, obviously we can still use dependency injection. I'm a big fan of it and I'll probably continue using it. But for making renderers, for accessing platform specific APIs, we can just do it with partial classes and remove all of that overhead, both performance-wise, overhead in terms of performance and also overhead in terms of learning curve, and just be able to access everything in the same project, taking advantage of partial classes in C#. Now, let's jump back. Whoops, did I just close out? There we go. Let's jump back to the label renderer, because there's a couple other things going on. So we talked about partial classes.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes.
We lost your.
Is that what happened?
Your code. Yeah.
I clicked a button and something flashed on the screen. There we go.
There we go. Thanks.
And yeah, let me know anytime. I think the last meetup I presented, I accidentally did that 3 times. So it probably will happen again. I appreciate the heads up. Okay, so we talked earlier about MAUI's renderers using contracts, using interfaces, and we get to see how that works here. So this label renderer has to implement iLabel. So if we start digging into iLabel here, let's go to declaration. Boom. So we see iLabel is just an interface and it inherits from iText. So when you have to create an iLabel, or when you want to create a label, you have to inherit from iLabel, and it's going to require you to write the code, the platform specific code for how to handle the line height. And actually, let's look at that back in the platform specific code. See if we can do this side by side. So for example, line height. So to handle the line height, we've told it, we have a method called map property line height. And well, looks like we haven't implemented that. So yes, the team is still working on the .NET MAUI source code, but this, like how we see the color of the label, now we're able to access the native UI label, and we can access UI color and all that fun stuff here, just like we would if we were using or writing a iOS app without shared code. But back to iLabel. So iLabel also inherits from iText. So iText is going to require us to implement how we handle logic when the text changes or when the text type or the color changes. That inherits from iView. When this is where we see all the things we know and love from Xamarin.Forms. So like is enabled, being able to change the background color and all that fun stuff. So what's cool about this is instead of, well, let's say you created your own brand new operating system today, right? We've got iOS, we've got macOS, we've got Android, we've got Windows, and I created Brandon OS. have no idea why I would do that. But if I did, to add support for .NET MAUI, all I really have to do is follow these interfaces and tell it that this is how I want you to handle it when, say, the iLabel.text changes. So it becomes a really simplified way, again, flattening that learning curve to get up to speed on MAUI. And if you want to create MAUI and have it run on different platforms, it's a lot more intuitive now than, I'm sure it was really hard for the Samsung team when they added support for Tizen, because they essentially had to reinvent the wheel. They had to probably, if they were like me, they probably looked at how Xamarin.Forms did it for iOS and Android, probably copy pasted some of that, but maybe not all of it, and figure out their own implementation. Here, we are using property mappers. So what is a property mapper? Well, this is how we're essentially reimagining on element property changed. And so let me show side by side Xamarin.Forms source code. Let's get that out of the way. Xamarin.Forms. And actually check this out. GitHub just added me to like some preview UI features. And they're completely changing how they're doing the UI, which is pretty cool. Okay, yeah, what are we doing? We're looking at the source code. So let's view the code. Xamarin.Forms, platform, iOS. So let's look at a label renderer in Xamarin.Forms on iOS. Keep going, there it is. Okay, so like I said, renderers don't really have a specific way or contract like .NET MAUI will for how they're implemented. And this is kind of how they look today. So it is a bunch of if-else statements, because anytime I notify property changed fires, we come into here on element property changed. And the first thing Xamarin.Forms has to do is figure out, well, which property changed? Was it the font? Was it the text? Was it the text color? And so the way that's implemented in Xamarin.Forms is just this huge if-else, else-if block where we have to check the property change event args to say, is that property name the horizontal text alignment property? Is that property name the vertical text alignment property? And you can see how this just grew over time into essentially a monstrously large method. And don't get me wrong, it works. But when we start talking about performance, well, if-else statements aren't as fast as, say, a switch. And if you've ever done, or if you've ever looked at the comparison between a bunch of if-else statements and a switch, the reason switches are able to, we'll say, execute more quickly is they jump exactly to the scenario. So the compiler knows ahead of time what are all the conditions, and when that condition comes in, it can essentially use some, it's not really predictive branching, but it knows all the different scenarios already, so it can jump straight to the one it needs to execute. Well, here we have a bunch of if-else blocks. So you would think we kind of lose some performance there, but it turns out C#'s smart enough that when we click compile, that, and I think the magic number is 5 if-else blocks chained together. I think if we have 5 else-ifs, then C# will actually turn that into a switch for us. So C# smart enough, we get that performance bump by default, and we're still left with all these if-else statements. Now, you keep going with that. You add more else-if blocks, or even if you have even if we were doing this in a switch block, keep adding more cases to your switch. There also becomes a point where the compiler goes, nah, I'm smarter than this. And instead of keeping the if-else or keeping the switch when we compile, actually turns that code into a dictionary, because dictionaries are indexed ahead of time. And if you're familiar with, remember the big O notation, you can essentially get O of 1 indexing speeds when reading from a dictionary, because everything's indexed ahead of time. So C#'s been helping us out here on the Xamarin.Forms renderers, but what we're doing in MAUI is we're just skipping all of that. We're just going straight to that dictionary implementation. And that's what a property mapper is and does. So when a property changes in .NET MAUI, instead of having this big long if else block checking everything, because we have these interfaces, because we have these contracts defined ahead of time, all the property mapper has to do is say, tell me what changed. Oh, it was color. Boom, execute this line of code. And while we get that performance improvement, thanks to the C# compiler for Xamarin.Forms, we're just jumping straight to it in MAUI. And the other nice thing is it makes it makes the code a lot easier to read. And it also happens to play nicely with the partial classes as well. Okay, so the next question, or the next thing I want to jump to is how can we start playing around with .NET MAUI today, right? Because I mean, it is all open source, and actually I should mention something as well. Let's go back to that .NET MAUI repo. If and when you check out the .NET MAUI repo, probably the first thing you'll notice is that it looks really familiar, and that's because it should, because all we did, let's see if we can do this side by side. Because all we did was, so far, has been to take Xamarin.Forms and just basically copy paste into the .NET MAUI repo and just change the namespaces. So one of the nice things with MAUI is the Xamarin.Forms you know and love is still going to be available to us. So yeah, we talked about MVU, and I'll get into that more in some source code and show you how that works in a couple minutes. But our Xamarin.Forms app built in XAML using the MVVM architecture, all of that's still going to work in .NET MAUI because we literally took all of that and just copy pasted it in here, just changing the namespace from Xamarin.Forms, in this case, control gallery WPF, to system.maui control gallery.wpf. So on day one in, what did I say, November 2021, when .NET MAUI hits long-term stable, to migrate from Xamarin.Forms to .NET MAUI, just change your namespaces. So hopefully that won't be too painful. I'm hoping I can just do a find all and replace, but that's basically it to migrate. But what's cool about that is you're going to get those renderer improvements for free just by switching from Xamarin.Forms to MAUI, because yes, you'll be able to use the same XAML, or if you're like me and create your UIs in C# with MVVM, all of that will still be available in system.maui or .NET MAUI, but it's just the namespace has changed. So all of the, we'll say the plumbing, all of this under the hood with the renderers will be there for you, and we don't really need to do anything. That being said, MVU, Model View Update, is coming, and it is being promoted as a first-class citizen in .NET MAUI. So what does that mean? Well, it's kind of a different way of well, it is. It's a totally different way of architecting your app compared to MVVM. That's literally what it means. But what if we want to try it out today? Like, what is available for us so that when .NET MAUI hits, we can start using it and we can hit the ground running? Well, good news and bad news. The bad news is .NET MAUI, because it's going to be baked into .NET 6, even somebody like me who works at Microsoft, I can't actually create a sample app using some of this code because there's certain things that I need on my computer that haven't been released yet because .NET 6 hasn't come out in preview yet. So bummer, but I've got a cool workaround for us, because there is a library that is actually what .NET MAUI is based off of or inspired by, called Comet. So let me open up this sample app and let me make sure I am on correct branch. So geolocation, move to Comet. Cool. All right, so let's spin that up and let's tell you what, while that's loading, let's explain what Comet is. So Comet was made by James Clancy, one of our engineers at Microsoft. James and I work together at Xamarin. He's an insanely smart guy. And he spent, he literally did this in a week. I mean, he's iterated over it for the last year or so, but we have this thing called 1 week or a hack week at Microsoft. And Clancy saw this cool new thing that debuted by Apple called Swift UI. And it's like, wait a minute, that's pretty cool. I wonder if I could get something working like that with Xamarin. And so what he made was this library called Comet. And one of the first things you'll notice, it's got C# hot reload already working. So Clancy, he cracked this nut about a year ago. And again, a lot of this is the inspiration for .NET MAUI and for including the MVU architecture. So you see things like state and body, those are part of MVU. But at the same time, we're doing all of this in C#. We have C# hot reload working here. And kind of similar to the C# markup extensions that we were talking earlier in the slides, all of this code is able to be done inline. So like new text dot font size dot color. And you can kind of see how this all is coming together with writing your code in C#. And I don't think he shows off the MVU. Okay, he touches on the MVU architecture just a little bit, but this is more about just showing, hey, look at this cool new experimental library I made. Wouldn't it be cool if we had something like this in Xamarin? And that's basically what happened and what inspired .NET MAUI. So today, you can play around with Comet because we're going to need to wait till .NET 6 before we can play around with MAUI. But Comet uses the MVU architecture. It has C# hot reload available too. And you can start getting a feel for how to architect your apps and also how to, if you have been using XAML, how to kind of rethink that UI or repicture it in your head, how it'll appear in C#. Okay, so enough talking about it. I've included the link to Comet on that website I put together for us, and I'll make sure to give everybody a chance to grab the screenshot of that link later as well. So I haven't forgotten about you, but what I want to show you is this little sample app I made in Comet, and it'll probably be helpful if I show you the app so you can get an idea of what the app looks like, and then we'll dive into the code. But while this is building, just to show you, so Clancy.comet is the name of the NuGet package. Make sure you turn on preview releases in NuGet because this is technically in beta. Although that being said, it'll never leave beta because Comet was an experimental framework to begin with. And this app that I've made is just one-page app to track my geolocation. I actually made this a while ago before Comet, just because I travel a lot and I'm always kind of curious where I am, and also like if I'm on a plane, like what's my current altitude? I don't know, I'm weird. I think that stuff's really cool. So using the simulators, it doesn't give me any data. So there's not too much to see here other than kind of what the UI looks like. But the way this UI code is generated is right here in this method called generate body. So the first big thing to notice with MVU, so again, it stands for model, view, update. And so our view is a method, it's a function. And this function runs anytime we need to, or anytime our model has updated. There we go. I think I hit all three buzzwords in one sentence. So generate body. This is the method that runs when the app is first launched. This is the method that runs anytime our state changes. And I'll explain what state means in just a minute. But just to give you an idea, so I've created some title text, I've created some label text, and some of this is static, like title text is just always going to be lat long. That's never going to change. But label text, this is actually referencing our state. So I'm pulling a variable and passing that in, converting this double to a string so that we can display the latitude and longitude. So let's make this a little bit bigger here. Whoop. Did we freeze? Nope. Is it because I'm debugging? Well, let's do it. Oh no. Strange, Visual Studio for Mac will let me close this panel. That's okay. We can do this. All right. So what's going on here? Well, with MVU, we have a state object. So what I've done here, I'm just passing in, this is from Xamarin Essentials. So I'm just using Xamarin Essentials to pull the geolocation data. That's what I'm doing down here. So once a second, I ask Xamarin Essentials, I say, get me the location. It comes back, and this location object is Xamarin.essentials.location. So I didn't even make this model. But what happens is every time the value of this state is updated, we run generate body. Now, this sounds a little strange, right? Because if you're like me, my first thought was, hang on, these performance implications are going to be painful. If we are updating the UI every time, then there's no way it'll be able to update seamlessly, right? We're going to get jitter on our UI. Things are going to be moving around and having to snap back in place because strings are going to change, font sizes are going to change. Like all this is crazy. But turns out totally doable. And part of the secret sauce there is in .NET MAUI, we'll have a diffing engine. So .NET MAUI will be smart enough to determine what has changed and only update that value. So for example, if maybe my latitude hasn't changed because I'm driving east, so only my longitude has changed. Hopefully I got that right. If not, if only one of these values has changed, then .NET MAUI will be smart enough to say, well, the altitude's still the same. The accuracy and longitude hasn't changed. Only latitude has. Let's only update that on the view. So yes, generate body gets triggered every time the state updates, but it doesn't necessarily mean we are redrawing the UI every time. Now, all of that being said, there are writing a diffing engine is hard, right? Because there's only so many cases you can account for. And there are going to be cases where it's going to be possible to, I don't say trick, but maybe fool the diffing engine, and it'll just get confused. If it can't determine what the difference is, then it'll actually update everything. So we'll have some docs about performance and best practices on how to do it. So keep an eye out for those. But yes, every time your model is updated, so every time, in this case, location state.value is changed, generate body is ran, or generate body runs, and we update the view. So this is kind of model view update in a very simple, boiled down scenario. The other thing I want to point out is in the video that I showed you of Clancy creating the app in real time, or his app in real time, he made all this UI inline. I personally just created a nested class down here so that I could share the code. But yeah, there was no reason I couldn't have said this is a new text and then have said fill horizontal, passing in the font weight. I could have done that all here as well. So we do get these, this is called the Fluent syntax, where we can do all of this inline. But in this case, I've got 3 different titles. I've got 3 different labels. It made more sense to kind of share this code instead of having to retype it out every single time. And again, these take in either a function or take in a single piece of text. So we can make it constant, or we can make it so that .NET MAUI knows this is a value that relies on our state and will be updated. Whew, let me pause here for questions, because again, I've been talking probably, I think it's been another 30, 40 minutes. What questions do you have so far? Either the .NET MAUI source code or this Comet MVU architecture source code?
So we had a presentation on Flutter, I think a month or so ago.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I think this actually, the model view update and like kind of what they're doing here with this method, it looks very similar to what we saw there. Is that true?
Yep. That's kind of Flutter was the first, we'll say, major cross-platform framework to implement model view update to completely redraw the view. And yeah, like when I mentioned my first thought being like, that's crazy, there's no way that could work. It was actually when I heard about Flutter doing it, because I was like, oh, well, that's silly, because man, think of all the performance problems they're going to have. And it actually turns out, because the way Flutter does it, they're actually using Skia. So they don't use the native UI APIs. They just use Skia to draw everything, almost like a painter painting onto a blank canvas. And it turns out, in a lot of scenarios, Flutter is faster just by drawing everything on the screen, by using model view update, than it would have been to use the native controls and use the older architectures. But yeah, Flutter totally does this. So that could be another way, if you are familiar with Dart or Flutter, to kind of try out model view update and get a feel for this new architecture, or new to .NET developers architecture, I should say.
Cool. While you were going too, we had one comment that said, why would I prefer Xamarin or .NET MAUI over Blazor?
Well, I guess that's up to you. I mean, sorry, that's a cop out. So yeah, Blazor. Well, I guess we should talk about what is Blazor and what are the different options available around Blazor. Blazor uses a technology called WASM, which is, it's not an acronym, but just it's shorthand for WebAssembly, WASM, WASM. And it's a way to create a PWA, a progressive web app. So the difference between a PWA, a progressive web app, and just, I guess we'll call them a normal web app, is that when we typically visit a website, like if I go to, well, I don't know which websites are PWAs and which aren't nowadays, but I don't know, let's say I go to github.com, and let's say GitHub is not a PWA. Well, when my browser navigates to github.com, the GitHub servers render the website and then just pass along that information, just passes along the CSS, the HTML. And so I'm viewing the website, but all of that work, all that horsepower was done server side. With progressive web apps, with PWAs, with WASM, with Blazor, it's all that. When you visit a website that's a PWA, your browser actually downloads all the code for the website, and then all that rendering happens locally on your machine. So it's actually pretty cool, because you can literally play games in your browser with super high quality graphics, multiplayer games, because your computer can handle all that rendering a lot faster than having to go back and forth the server. And so what this unlocks, and actually, since we're going down this tangent, I gave a presentation recently. Was it MDev Camp? No, it was ADC Oslo. I just want to show you this little GIF, because this is one of the coolest things about PWA. So actually, let me say first, there we go. So one of the downsides of PWAs, especially compared to what we're doing with Xamarin and what we will be doing in .NET MAUI, is PWAs are meant to run in a browser, and specifically like the speccing and the design for it is, the idea is all around, this is going to run in a browser, on a desktop, on a laptop. So it's like me running Safari, running Chrome. And what that means for us mobile developers is, yes, progressive web apps have access to certain platform-specific APIs. Like here I've highlighted Bluetooth, local notifications, the camera, but they don't have access to all of the native APIs. So if you need to do something like, if your app wants to make the phone vibrate, if say a user does a long press, it'll buzz. Well, vibration isn't really a thing for somebody using a laptop in Chrome. So those APIs don't exist for PWAs. And so when you think about the limitations of web apps or progressive web apps, is think of what's available to me in a browser. That's what I'm going to be able to access. So things like offline storage, file access, camera, all these things that we're used to doing in a browser, geolocation. But if we wanted to do things like AR, augmented reality, like we want to use Apple's AR kit, well, that's not available to us in the PWA. So that's one downside. But a huge upside is this. The fact that PWAs can be installed on a mobile device without needing to go through the App Store. So kind of going full circle to the story we were chatting about earlier, where the app Hey is getting essentially kicked off the App Store. And because on iOS, there's only one App Store where you can download your apps, it kind of cripples you. But with a PWA, I can navigate to this website. It's like I navigated to the Google Maps PWA in my browser in Safari on my iPhone. And when I do that, I just have to tap that share sheet and say, add to home screen. So add to home screen. This app, this PWA is actually downloaded and running on my device, on my iOS device, as if it's its own app. So like when you see me force quit, it's its own app. That's iOS running Maps as an app. It's not Maps running in Safari. It's not like I just bookmarked it. That PWA actually downloaded to my device. So this is a huge, huge benefit of PWAs because you don't have to go through the App Store anymore, which means like if Hey had built their iOS Android implementation as a PWA, wouldn't have any of those problems today because you can just add it to your home screen. And the other nice thing about this, and something I'm also jealous of, is, well, how do I put this? Users don't update their apps. So the majority of users have auto update turned on. So when I push out a new version of my Get Trends app, well, it'll just update next time the user is charging their phone. But not everybody does that. And what it means is now I'm left with a couple apps in the App Store that have gone from version 2 to version 5 over years. And what do I do if I still have a user on version 2, even though the latest version is version 5, and that older version is still using my older APIs? So do I just turn off those APIs and say, well, sorry, user who never updates your apps, tough cookies, or do I continue supporting those old APIs? So with PWAs, because you're not going through the App Store, because it's just downloaded directly to the device, your users will always be up to date because when this app launches, it gets the phone home to your web servers to get the latest updates. And you don't have to worry about making sure older versions are still supported. So let's see. I think the original question was why you'd use Xamarin.Forms instead of Blazor. So Blazor is a way you can make PWAs. We've got it listed here. And it's a totally valid way to make websites, or if you want your website to run on a mobile device, you can totally do that. But one of the downsides is the feature access. So you're only going to be able to access APIs that a browser expects to be able to use. And let's see. No, I think we touched it. So that's Blazor. Oh yeah. So there's also another thing called Blazor Mobile Bindings. So no, it's also open source. Where's the GitHub repo? Cool. So there's also Blazor or mobile Blazor bindings. This is a experimental framework that it's available. Anybody can use it right now. It's also open source, but basically it is, let's see, do we have screenshots here? Okay. So basically it's writing your code like you would for a Blazor app. So it's got the Blazor engine, but it compiles down using Xamarin into a native iOS and Android app. So if you are already familiar with the Blazor syntax, so this will look very familiar to you. If you are, great. And then also with the Xamarin.Forms syntax, that'll look really familiar to you as well. Well, you can create a whole iOS Android app using that Blazor/Xamarin.Forms syntax, and it'll run on, and again, natively on iOS and Android. So also just another option. So when it comes to the different technologies in Blazor, the big caveat being that Blazor is what we call experimental, which if you're not familiar with Microsoft's terminology, experimental means we reserve the right to cancel this tomorrow. So we think we made something cool. Ilon here, he's a super smart dude. He's actually one of the original creators of ASP.NET. Wanted to bring that functionality to mobile and bring more web developers to mobile, created mobile Blazor bindings, but it is experimental. So if one day in the future you see the experimental tag removed, then that means we'll basically welcome this into the .NET family. Right now it's totally .NET. It's a really cool tool, but I wouldn't build an app and push it to the App Store using mobile Blazor bindings today. But would I play around with it? Heck yeah. Whew. Let's see, did I cover everything?
I believe so. So we're just past the 7:30 mark. Brandon, I'm not sure how much more content you're looking to go over. I mean, this is typically where we'd turn things over to Q&A, but if you've got a little bit more to cover, I don't want to cut you off, and I guess
no
I'll
worries.
leave it up to you.
So actually, this is a perfect stopping point because I was able to cover everything, and just wanted to share this link one more time in case somebody has to jump off. So again, this is the website for this meetup today. You can find the slides here. You'll be able to find the recording. I've got links to the .NET MAUI source code, the .NET MAUI blog posts. I mentioned that James Clancy, the engineer for .NET MAUI or creator of .NET MAUI, does a 2-hour deep dive on his Twitch channel that I linked there as well. And all the new stuff with Xamarin.Forms and all that fun stuff. So lots of information here. If anybody couldn't make it today, feel free to just send them this link, and then they'll have all the info that we just soaked up. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm happy to take a break. I'll probably grab a drink, and then we can do some Q&A, or we can check out source code. We can kind of do whatever.
Sure. How does that sound, everybody? Would we like to take a short break and come back for some questions and a deep dive into the source code? Let me check with the chat.
There you
go. We've got 24 still with us, so I think okay. We'd like to hang out. Yeah, we got a sure. So short break. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
All right, cool.
Good.
All right, be back in a minute.
Sounds good. All right, looks like quite a few folks are still here. So for those of you who are hanging out, well, we got another question that just came in. I'm gonna leave that one for Brandon. But yeah, for those of you who are still here, we're gonna just take a short break yet, and then when we get back, we're gonna kind of go over some other questions and get a deep dive into the source code. Yeah, so stay tuned. We'll be back in a little bit. You're back.
There we go.
Hey. So we did have one question come in while you were away. If you want to,
Is this the one in the chat?
Yeah. Do you want to start taking questions? Is now work?
Totally. I have no idea what that means. So Xamarin or .NET MAUI dealing with polyfills or browser/platform specific functionality or lack of. Bala, what do you want to unmute and dive into a little bit more about, or explain a little bit more about what you're asking?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So earlier my question was, why would I use Xamarin or the .NET MAUI or Blazor? And you've answered that. But I'm looking to build a web application and eventually can turn itself into a progressive web app using Blazor. But one of the things is in order to support all platforms, IE, for example, certain versions of IE, I don't know if IE is still popular or not. I wish it would go away.
Yeah.
But certain functionality does not work, so I have to look for polyfills in that case. So if I were to switch to Xamarin or .NET MAUI, then do I run into any limitations when it comes to, these specific browsers?
Well, with Xamarin and .NET MAUI, it won't work in a browser. So right now we're talking about desktop apps, mobile apps, and like for Xamarin.Forms, for example, only pretty much focuses on iOS and Android with some desktop support. But yeah, I think the big problem here is if you did Xamarin today or MAUI as it comes out in .NET 6, it doesn't have support for any browser implementation.
What about like WebAssembly or Uno, or not Uno? What was it, Uno?
Yeah, maybe Uno. Let's see. Uno. I guess Uno platform. I'm trying to figure out like what can I Google without bringing up the Uno playing cards game or Spanish words. Let's see.
Yes, these guys.
For WebAssembly. Let's see. Just kind of scanning for keyword edit XAML in the browser. Test on mobile. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think the simple answer is, as of today, and even true once MAUI's first released in .NET 6, it won't have browser support. So Xamarin and .NET MAUI won't be even a viable option. But if anybody knows more about Uno than me and knows whether or not this could be also used as a website, feel free to shout it out. But I am not sure myself.
All right, sounds good. No worries. Thank you.
Even the, let's see, the GitHub repo says build mobile, desktop, and WebAssembly apps. I don't know.
Xamarin.
ASP.NET. Man, I mean, he keeps saying WebAssembly, but really what I want is just like that next logical step would be like in the browser is, I mean, WebAssembly is, that's kind of the point of WebAssembly. But yeah, I don't want to make any assumptions or promises. Let's see.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is the point of the WebAssembly, to support applications running in a browser.
Yeah, right. Oh, Uno platform for web. Okay, we're getting, okay, Blazor mobile, WebAssembly, Bound for Tech. Actually,
I think you'd
there we
definitely
go.
be limited in older versions of IE though.
Oh yeah, I have no idea how that works with older versions of IE. I'm not a web developer. I skipped over the web and jumped straight into mobile back in the day.
You're smart. That's why you don't have gray hair.
Am I though? I mean, mobile's really hard. Like,
It is.
that's something I always find interesting being a mobile app developer. Like when people find out that you make iOS and Android apps, then the first thing they say to you is, oh, I got this great idea for an app. So it's a super simple app. And then they keep talking for like 15 minutes. And you're like, that is not a super simple app. Like that is going to take hundreds of hours of development work. But like, here's my card. Like, I'm happy to do some consulting. And then they're like, then they find out like, oh, wow, that would be $60,000. Yeah, that's your simple app.
Yeah.
All right, so got stumped once with Bala. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got a question about. So I know that you said, you know, at one point, I think it was whenever we have the .NET 6 preview, which will be November, and that'll be when we can first start maybe seeing the early bits of MAUI. When it goes live, say the following year, should we or could we expect, and I mean, obviously, like one of the big ones that I see is just the namespace changes across all your classes, like when you want to migrate an app to MAUI.
Right.
I mean, are we thinking that this is going to be so big where like there's going to need to be like migration tools or assistance that would be out there? Is this going to be more of a manual process where it's just kind of a massive find and replace? Like what happens to our existing renderers, things like that?
Oh yeah, existing renderers. I didn't think about that. I mean, full disclosure, I'm not on the MAUI engineering team, so I'm closer. I'm probably the closest in this meeting since I work at Microsoft. I've got some internal details I know about, but yeah. So what I can say is that is something that the team's working on, because that's something I asked too. Is like one of the recent examples, or maybe ongoing if you haven't migrated yet, is Android X. Yep. So Android's basically, you know, every couple of years they change how they distribute their libraries, and it used to be the Google Play support libraries, and now it's all becoming Android X, because they figured, why not make it easier and take our support libraries and break them up into smaller libraries, and we'll call that Android X or Jetpack. And to be honest, what I've been asking the team is, can we emulate that process? Because if anybody's migrated a Xamarin app to Android X, it's super simple. Like I mean, if you're doing Xamarin.Forms, you almost don't need to do anything, because what the compiler is doing behind the scenes is if it detects a old support library, it's just automatically updating that namespace, that class behind the scenes. So your app is running totally on Android X, and the compiler did the work for you. Now, you should eventually go in and over time sort of flip over those namespaces yourself, but it was a pretty painless process. And so, yeah, one of my requests actually was, can we have something like that for MAUI? And they said they're working on it. So again, who knows what Maui's going to look like in a couple months once we finalize on all the architecture and everything, but it's definitely on the team's to-do list. So will it be as easy as Android X? Maybe. But basically, we'll know more once we have the architecture nailed down. But the team's aware. People want it. Give the people what they want, right?
Yeah. Any other questions, or should I just keep going?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Great.
What's going on, Mike?
Mike here. Yeah. Brandon, anything you see as you've seen the future of Xamarin from your access there around like innovations with Visual Studio for Windows versus VS for Mac, or more support, or any kind of anything to say about that?
Sure. And I feel your pain too, because yeah, I'm that weird guy that writes code in his spare time. So spend all day coding for work, and then, well, now we're all working from home. So I shift to another seat on the couch, and then I just keep coding on my own projects. So yeah, no, I'm well aware of the pain, the delay of features coming to the Mac. So yeah, what's been going on, right? If we go all the way back, Microsoft acquired Xamarin. Xamarin had an IDE called Xamarin Studio, and Microsoft thought it'd be a great idea just to take that and rebrand it as Visual Studio for Mac. Wasn't my recommendation. Mine was actually quite the opposite, because I told them as soon as you rebrand it, people are going to expect everything in Visual Studio to be there, when really it's just Xamarin Studio. So like, as a Xamarin developer, didn't really impact me much, but then you have people going, oh, cool, I can do Visual Studio on the Mac. And so, oh, wait, why can't I do WPF? Or where's ASP.NET? Like, none of that stuff was there at the beginning. And it's gotten better, but yeah, so we had a lot of complaints around that. And what the teams started doing after that, which probably should have done it before that, is essentially merging the two code bases. So what I mean by that is the engine that runs Visual Studio and Visual Studio for Mac has essentially been merged. They're both using the same like Roslyn engine behind the scenes, and that also caused some new bugs to pop up in Visual Studio for Mac. So if you were playing along like I was, you saw Visual Studio for Mac quality dip, and now we're back on the upslope. So a lot of that was just because we had to rip out the whole back end and essentially merge it with Visual Studio. But the benefit there is features will be coming to Visual Studio for Mac more quickly. Now, what has happened recently is, well, Microsoft always loves reorgs. So reorganizing the who's on what team and who reports to whom. Microsoft does it at least once a year, if not multiple times, and you just kind of get used to it working here. But no, we recently reorged, and the reason I bring this up is the Xamarin team has always kind of been its own team, even since the acquisition. And it's kind of nice because, you know, not a lot changed, and we were still able to kind of use some of our previous processes and workflows. But it recently, the Xamarin team is now all in there's just one .NET team. So if you're an engineer working on Mono, if you're an engineer working on Xamarin.Forms, if you're an engineer working on Xamarin iOS, you're now part of the .NET team. And the reason I appreciate this is it gives us more of a seat at the table as Xamarin employees. And one of the previous problems was Xamarin was always playing catch up. So like, it's no secret, you've probably noticed this, but like when new things come out, they hit Visual Studio first, and then eventually make their way to Visual Studio for Mac, or they hit .NET or .NET Core first, and then eventually make their way to Mono. And a lot of that was just because how our roadmaps, I guess you could say, aligned or didn't align. Whereas now, every decision that's made, like essentially now that Xamarin's taking over, or Xamarin.Forms is taking over .NET as the de facto multi-platform, cross-platform user interface with MAUI, those changes kind of have to go through us. So what's nice, and we'll see what happens. This reorg was fairly recent, but being a part of the .NET org and having such a large stake in the future of .NET makes me super optimistic. And that's kind of why I keep saying, like, Xamarin's just taken over .NET, because our engineers are now .NET engineers. Well, they always have been, but they're officially .NET in the .NET org. Xamarin.Forms is becoming the de facto user interface. And so I'm really optimistic, and I like the way this is going, because that coupled with, we didn't talk about this today, but in .NET 5, one of the big things is Mono merging with .NET Core, because Microsoft got in this weird place where both Mono exists that allows you to build cross-platform .NET apps, and .NET Core exists that allows you to build cross-platform .NET apps. And they have different benefits, like .NET Core can be faster, but it's also just-in-time compiled, whereas Mono is ahead of time compiled. And for things like iOS, you can't submit an app to the App Store unless it's ahead of time compiled. So you would never have been able to use, it's called Ryujit, the just-in-time compilation engine for .NET Core. You could have never used that for an iOS app. And so what we're doing now in .NET 5 is bringing what's called the BCL, the base class libraries, like the system libraries and all that stuff, bringing that together. And so the future looks really bright, because now we have basically Mono is integrated in with .NET. We have our Xamarin engineers integrated into the .NET teams. We have Xamarin.Forms taking over as the de facto UI framework for .NET. And I know I'm biased, but yeah, I'm super optimistic about the future of Xamarin, the future of MAUI, and the future of .NET. Did I answer your question? Feel free to follow up, Mike. If I ramble a lot, if you hadn't already figured that one out.
Thanks a lot. I'm actually Visual Studio for Windows developer, so I'm more of a Xamarin for Windows developer.
Oh, right on.
I was just curious if there was anything, with pair to Mac world and some of those issues.
Yeah, and something that, and this is just Brandon talking. I have no idea what will happen around this, but something that's interesting in the future is, actually, maybe you folks have seen this, maybe you haven't, but GitHub just at Build announced this thing called code spaces. And so what it means is I can just launch this code in my browser, and yep, let's go back to when I was working in yesterday. And once this spins up, you'll notice it looks really familiar, because it's basically just Visual Studio Code, but running in the browser. And so it takes a minute to spin up, because really what's happening behind the scenes is we're loading up a VM on Azure, we're installing all the SDKs and the frameworks that you need for writing code. But once it does load, we'll see Visual Studio Code running in the browser. And this is called GitHub Code Spaces. And again, just Brandon talking. This is totally my speculation. I have no inside knowledge about what the future holds or what it might be, but I got a hunch, if this is successful, that this could end up being the future, I would say the future of Visual Studio, period. So this is Visual Studio Code running in your browser. You'd have Visual Studio Code as a option on your desktop. So, that offline scenario. But I kind of see, and I have no idea if it's even possible, but I kind of see this as being the future. So maybe one day this usurps Visual Studio, or is that even possible? Because Visual Studio, it's a workhorse, but who knows? Actually, let me just create a new code space. It loaded a lot faster when I tried it out yesterday. But yeah, so kind of one other reason I say that is we mentioned .NET MAUI will have, I'm wondering because I'm in Safari. .NET MAUI will have support, or maybe flip that around. Visual Studio Code will be a first-party platform for .NET MAUI code. And so because this is literally, there it is, Visual Studio Code, boom, running in your browser. That's kind of where I'm coming with this crystal ball forecast. But like I said, who knows what is even possible with doing this? I don't know what limitations are there for running code in the browser. Again, you're going to get into stuff like the AOT stuff in iOS and provisioning profiles. Who knows? But it's kind of a cool future to dream about. But yeah, like here's my code. And instead of cloning this, I'm just running it in the browser. And I don't know how well it works with Xamarin stuff, but like if this is just a basic .NET Core app, yeah, I could totally build and run it, no problem. I wonder what happens if I click build, open a file. Looks like it needs some configuration, like C# extensions. Okay. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, it'd be kind of cool to live in this world where there's kind of one editor that works everywhere, and who knows? We'll see what happens. That'll probably be like a decade away. Yeah, restoring NuGet packages. I just got this preview of Codespaces yesterday, so this is also new to me too.
All right, Mike, did you have anything else there, or is that it?
Oh, no, I'm good. Thank you.
Cool. Oh, good question. I've actually been having a lot of problems with Visual Studio for Mac myself. I'm getting tons of hangs when trying to launch the IDE or close the IDE. Actually, last weekend, this was the first time I've ever had to do this. I actually uninstalled everything Visual Studio wise, with the uninstall scripts, and I re-put everything back on my machine just to think that maybe cleaning it up would help. And I've also been thinking maybe I'll just move over to my Parallels instance to work from now on, but that doesn't sound great to me either.
No. So are you on the latest? Is that happening on the latest stable?
Yeah, I've been stable everything. I very rarely go down to preview unless there's like some huge thing, which happened like a few months back, but I've been on stable now for a long time.
Interesting. I mean, if you haven't already, anytime that stuff happens, actually, you can still see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I went into the developer community and did a
problem.
search. Yeah, I didn't report anything, and I should have. There are other like more just kind of vague people saying that they were having issues, like, or vague reported problems, but nothing that looked specific to I couldn't even find like how to reproduce it other than just it would start happening and then it just would take forever to load up. So I didn't really even know what I would put in the report, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean just to so obviously I have no idea what's causing that, but I know, so I live on the preview channels. Let's see, what am I using right now? So I'm on 8.7 preview, which I think is just the current preview channel. But the reason I asked what version you were on, because I live in the preview channels. I feel like I kind of have to as a Microsoft employee. It's part of my duty. But the last preview before 8.7, so I guess it was 8.6, those previews were really unstable. And that's where I hit all those problems that you mentioned. Like I was force quitting Visual Studio Mac at least once a day, if not like once an hour or so. But I don't have that anymore on this preview channel. So, I mean, I can't speak exactly to what's going on your machine, but all of that does sound really familiar to me. And maybe try the preview, but I can't promise that that'll fix anything. Because I know what you mean, man. Like when those happens, like how do I report it? I can't even reproduce it.
Yeah, I'm on 8.6.4. So
I mean, the good news is when Visual Studio Mac crashes or when you force quit it, it'll automatically send that crash report back to the engineers. So if it is actually crashing or it's hanging and you're force quitting, the team gets notified every time. And I don't know. I take some solace in that because like it's frustrating when that happens. Like you're in the middle of coding, you're in the zone, and then all of a sudden everything freezes and you have to force quit it. And I'm just like, yeah, suckers, like take that. Take that crash report.
Yes. All right. Well, enough with my issues. We did have a question from Hector here. It said, Are there going to be community meetings for .NET MAUI every month, like what Microsoft is doing with distributed application runtime?
Ooh, nice job with the acronym. So there are already weekly community stand-ups for Xamarin. And before I spread any lies, let's see, .NET MAUI community stand-up maybe? So .NET community stand-up. So what I was about to say before jumping into Google's was I remember hearing that there will be. And so do I know where to find that? And do I know for 100% that yes, there will be? I don't. But I mean, here you got James Montemagno, Mr. Xamarin, David Ortnow, who owns basically mobile in the .NET world. So any mobile SDK, whether it's Xamarin.Forms, Xamarin iOS, .NET MAUI, and obviously Matty owns the Xamarin.Forms tooling. So, I mean, the fact that they're in here, these are the owners and the stakeholders. So I imagine somewhere in here, they probably mentioned MAUI, but if I had to guess, well, let's put it this way. I'll be shocked if there is not weekly or monthly, I forget the cadence, maybe it's bi-weekly community stand-ups for MAUI. But just do keep in mind that Xamarin.Forms and MAUI are going to be on parallel tracks for the next, oh gosh, year and a half, 2 years? I'm losing track of timelines. Every week feels like a year with this quarantine. But so they might not call it the .NET MAUI stand-up per se, but that's just because we're still working on Xamarin.Forms at the same time we're working on .NET MAUI. But yeah, I mean, those are already happening. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but I'll be shocked if we don't continue that with .NET MAUI.
Yeah, I just to add, I mean, I don't know if this is related or not, and like you said, whether it's .NET MAUI specific, but I do know that like a lot of the big stakeholders, like you were just pointing out, Maddie, David, I know Shane has been involved with some of those. They go on Twitch all the time and have weekly meetings, I think, that are open to everybody too. So.
Oh yeah, jump in there and bug them. give them the hard questions. They love that.
Let's see, anything else? We had a question about whether or not it's possible to contact you by email or phone for additional questions. I know you provided your Twitter handle earlier. I don't want you giving out your phone number for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, no, I just dropped my email into the chat too. Like I said, I'm really bad with email. It's more out of spite than anything else because I just wish it didn't exist. But yeah, I mean, shoot me an email. Ball, if you don't hear back from me, don't hesitate to follow up because I'm really bad about that. But yeah, if you shoot me a direct message on Twitter, I get the notification on my phone right away. I'm on Twitter probably 100 times a day. That sounds really bad when I say it out loud, but I'll probably see it on Twitter sooner than I'll see it in email. But yeah, that's my email address if you want to reach out.
I can say, everybody, while I was contacting Brandon on Twitter, usually my responses came through within a minute.
Oh, geez.
You were by far the most responsive presenter we've ever had, being that you're halfway across the country, which is pretty remarkable.
All right.
Maybe I just had to get the rest of the presenters from Twitter then.
Not sure if I should be proud of that or ashamed by it, but
no, I think it was fantastic.
I guess I'll have to go get a Twitter account now.
Yeah, well, I will say the other cool thing with Twitter is all of us, all the Xamarins, Microsofties, we're all on Twitter too. So you could literally tweet at David Ortnow and I'm not going to promise that he responds to every tweet, but he does respond to a lot. Now, as long as it's, if you ask him, we'll say politely, questions about .NET or Xamarin or Xamarin.Forms or MAUI, stuff in his wheelhouse, sure. But if you ask him things about like quantum theory, he's probably not going to be able to respond to you.
What's your next travels?
Oh, Steve, your audio is kind of rough.
Yeah, I caught you though, asking about the next travels. So I forget who mentioned it earlier, but somebody was saying that certain companies aren't going back to the office until there's a vaccine. That's kind of my take on this whole traveling during a pandemic thing. I mean, we'll see what happens, because if there's even a treatment, like if today you get the flu, you can go to the doctor and they give you what's called a Z-Pack, and you're done with the flu in a couple days. Boom. Just doesn't prevent it, but it at least, I don't know if cure is the right word. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. Yeah, if there's a treatment for COVID-19, or obviously if I can get a vaccine, yeah, I'm getting back on a plane. Of course, I've missed traveling like crazy. But what's been kind of cool about this is I've also been traveling in air quotes a lot recently, just because we're all at home, we're all online. So like I'm technically in Minnesota right now. I gave a presentation at a meetup in Sydney last week. I spoke at a conference in Prague last week. I spoke at a conference in Oslo last week. And so I've technically been traveling a bunch, but I also haven't left my apartment, which is, say, a good thing and a bad thing. You know, I know maybe my wife loves me being home. Hopefully she loves me being home more, but it's definitely a different kind of travel.
All right, any other questions? So I'm gonna have a selfish question for you that I've been trying to figure out a good answer to for quite some time.
Sure.
I brought this up with a few of the Xamarin folks at the Developer Summit last summer in Houston, and I wasn't able to really get anywhere with this. So what I find myself having to, or I'm asked this a lot, and I don't have a good solution for it, and I've tried a lot of different things, is so obviously when I'm building an app, I can build an app for a mobile phone, a tablet. It could be in portrait, it could be in landscape, it could be in all four of those. And typically when this comes into play, especially on a tablet, and I'm assuming that, you know, as we move into .NET MAUI and desktop and Linux, this is going to become more of a thing. But typically on a tablet device right now, I have clients who want to see the UI represented one way in landscape and one way in portrait. And
yeah.
And I always want to try to reuse controls and kind of swap them between containers. But I cannot find a good or clever way of doing some of this. And especially, whether it's XAML or, I think I've had better luck in C#, but it's still a little tricky. Like even with doing some crazy device, idiom stuff and like listing for orientation changes, I just can't get a good, I can't come up with a good solution to this. And everybody that I talked to last summer about this said, yeah, that's a really good question. And they really haven't, I really haven't found I try like the Visual State Manager, but I'm not a huge fan of that, if I'm being honest. I think it's a really verbose way of declaring your markup in XAML especially. But do you have any feedback on what's the best way to approach UI between screen sizes and orientation changing, and trying to reduce the need to recreate things and maintain, say I've got a video playing and I want to maintain state or something between container swapping at that moment?
Oh, so yeah, there's a couple parts to this question. If you want to know what I do, I just don't allow the users to use landscape. I remove that as an option. My apps only work in portrait mode. So if you're using one of my apps in the App Store, you can't flip it to landscape. And that's honestly just because it's easiest. And the apps I put in the App Store are just passion projects of mine. They're free. I don't make any money off of them. It's because I just do it for fun. So sorry, not sorry kind of thing. But what I have done, I wonder if this is still around, because the first version of that Get Trends app I pushed out did have landscape support. And so I can at least point to something I did once, but let's see. If I go to the code, I think I can go back to my old releases. But basically, what I did for this one was, yeah, let's go to the first one. Source code. Oh, okay. I was hoping I could just view it in the browser. But basically, yeah, I just recreated or created the same UI twice, which isn't, I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but
I've done that too.
that was one of the things I did because, yeah, there were certain UI layouts that if you rotated the phone, everything would just get squished, and there was all this real estate on the device that I wasn't taking advantage of. And why can't I click anything right now? I wonder if sharing my screen is blocking me. But so yeah, you have basically two options, right? Like if you think about how you do this, if you're just doing it for iOS, like pretend like you're not using Xamarin, pretend like you're not using Xamarin.Forms, you have the same problems, but now you're in storyboards or the Android designer. And the way to conquer that is to essentially use constraints. So you tell it, you know, you're going to be this many pixels away from the edge of the screen, this many pixels away from the top of the screen. And actually, before I keep going, do you know what I mean, Adam, with storyboards and constraints and auto layout? Yep. Okay.
So I guess I usually create, I mean, just to kind of give you and everyone else kind of high level, I usually have at like the base level of any one of my pages, I usually have an absolute layout. And then within that absolute layout, I always usually have a grid. And I define a specific number of rows or columns, which, you know, I can do paddings, margins, or like some kind of gutters. And then what I typically try to do is on those orientation changes, I'll change like, you know, a row or a column might change from being a 1x column to a 2x column on you know, if I've got more real estate to work with, say.
Yeah, and I mean, that's basically the same thing I was doing here. Like I just, you know, kind of MVU style, right? I had a method called create layout, and that's what I called in the constructor. Yeah, this is all in C# because, you know, me and XAML. But yeah, this display info change, this is part of Xamarin Essentials, right? Or is this Xamarin.Forms? I don't remember. But anyways, yeah, anytime layout would change, I'd call it again. And yeah, I just had, oh man, yeah, like if I'm in portrait mode, do the relative layout like this. Or yeah, if portrait mode like that, if not, and basically just had two versions of the same screen. And I mean, if somebody wanted to pay me to create this app, I would happily have two versions of the same screen for every screen. But as I kept working on this app and realizing how much you're basically creating the same app twice and how much work that is, I said, you know what? It's a free open source app. If anybody wants to do it, they can just open a pull request. But no, I can't do that as a single developer. So yeah, the problem is it's not, or the tough part is it's not necessarily a Xamarin problem. It's just a mobile problem. And
yeah,
as the devices get bigger, it just makes the problem worse. Cause like, yeah, like if I run this app on the iPad Pro, like it looks silly, but at the same time, when I look at my user metrics, I don't have a lot of people using the app on an iPad Pro. And so again, if somebody was paying me to do it, sure, happily. But yeah, that's kind of one of those sacrifices I made. And yeah, I literally just went in and I just turned off landscape. I said, I am only supporting portrait. So you can rotate your device all you want, but it's not changing.
Fair enough. All right, that's good. That's kind of where I landed with my the previous folks I've asked this with, and I think I've just come to realize that there's not a really good way to do it right now. And I've been working through some possibilities, but just haven't gotten there yet. And I just wondered if you might have some tips or tricks.
I wish. I mean, if you do crack this nut, let me know, because I imagine this is a problem faced by everybody. So
Well,
Yeah.
anyone who wants to support multiple orientations across different screen sizes.
Yep. Yeah, something that's also funny is like there's some Android tablets that are, I guess you would say, landscape by default. So their portrait mode is actually like a widescreen monitor. So that's how they define it. And that just messes up everything. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's Android for you. Like somebody made a device and they're like, yeah, why would anybody hold this device like this? We should hold it like this. We'll call that portrait mode. Like, oh.
All
Good
right.
question.
Anyone else? Do we have any other questions in the chat here? Doesn't look like it. All right. Well, does that just about do it, everybody?
I think so. At least for me. I had a weird, bizarre question, but I don't know if it's relevant to everybody in the group. So.
That's okay.
Yeah, throw it out there.
Okay.
Dun,
Well,
dun,
since I brought it up that way, I guess I'll continue. I'm working on a project where the bulk of the end users are going to be visually impaired, or a large chunk. So accessibility has become more important than the rest of the app in this case. And one thing I've noticed is that some of the features with voiceover and the swiping between fields is that iOS doesn't always respect the tab index order. It's sort of like it ignores it on half of the controls. And so that's one thing is, if you have any directions, you can point me in on that. And the other part of the question is, iOS also supports dynamic text sizing.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that if the user goes into the settings and says, oh, well, I want to get the largest font size iOS supports, I actually have to restart the application in order for the new sizes to take place. And somebody, I can't remember their name, wrote in a comment saying, yeah, we don't listen because, not everyone's using dynamic sizing. And I'm like, okay. So I know.
Not a great answer.
No, unfortunately not. And this is just me browsing around for it. But yeah, that's definitely the stuff that we're doing. It's setting the order and trying to figure out what the pieces are going on with that. So.
Yeah. So I guess my first question, are you using Xamarin.Forms?
Xamarin.Forms on
Okay.
The latest preview 2 of Windows Visual Studio.
Right on. So have you seen the visual element tab index API on Xamarin.Forms?
I haven't looked at the API, but that's the command I'm using.
Okay, cool. So interesting. Are you saying that you are using this, but it's not working like you expected?
Well, I've got a collection view where the basic page format is there's like a title, row, a description text, like welcome, hi, please enter username and password, or kind of thing. And then here's the list underneath it. And once I get into the list of items, I can go forward and backwards with VoiceOver on by swiping right and swiping left. But when I get to the top of the list view, it doesn't come back to that field. It'll go to the title navigation bar. It'll go skip down to the tab control at the bottom. But I can tap on that label and then navigate back in and out of it. But that's not going to work for users who are depending on the consistent right-left navigation.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I can say is, I'll be honest with you, like Xamarin.Forms didn't have accessibility in mind when it was first created. Actually, it didn't have any of this stuff in mind when it was first created. It was just meant to be like a quick prototyping tool. And then basically the community kind of ran with it, and we were kind of just playing catch up for the first couple of years of Xamarin.Forms because we're like, no, it's just a way to make a quick, simple app to show off a prototype, and then you go back to your storyboards and your Android XML. So yeah, this was definitely something that wasn't involved in the initial implementation of Xamarin.Forms, and it's been a problem because like basically we've just been playing catch up. But something I'm interested in. So that doesn't excuse anything, but I do know. Let me share Olo. Do they make mobile apps? Yeah, nailed it. Okay, so one of the companies I've worked with personally, and some of the engineers I know at Olo have probably hit every problem you are or have hit as well when it comes to accessibility, because the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, requires certain companies to be accessible. And honestly, like we should all do that, because I heard the saying once, like we're only temporarily healthy, right? Eventually we're all going to get sick and spin the wheel, but who knows what's going to happen. So we should be thinking ahead and planning ahead. Unfortunately, most folks aren't, because we tend to live in the moment. But the folks at Olo, because they make apps for restaurants, so you can see like Applebee's, Five Guys, Denny's, they are required by the ADA for their mobile apps to be accessible. And not a lawyer, don't know all the laws, but I know if you are working with restaurants, then all these things apply. So I remember working with the team at Olo back in the day on some of this, and I'm trying to figure out what's the best path forward, because I'll say I myself am not an accessibility expert. I wish I was, but I know the folks at Olo are. And so let's say this. I mean, John, if you want, shoot me either an email or send me a message on Twitter, because I know some folks at Olo that I can connect you with. I can't make any promises that they'll be able to, or like that they'll have the time or the bandwidth to help out, or that they'll be able to jump in with you. But at least being able to chat with somebody who is more familiar with this than I am would be a good step in the right direction. But something I'm also interested in, now that we brought it up, is do we have a conversation going in Maui yet? Because Xamarin.Forms wasn't built with accessibility in mind, because it wasn't built with, say, production applications in mind. That doesn't excuse anything. But we have this awesome opportunity with Maui to kind of fix this. And I know David Ortnow is aware of this. The product manager for the Xamarin, .NET mobile SDKs, whether you want to call it Maui or Xamarin. But I think this is something that we should definitely get in the forefront. And so what I was looking just now is, do we have anything, like what would be another buzzword just while we're searching? Say that one more time, Steve.
508.
The numbers like this?
Yep. That's one of the accessibility standards.
Weak egg.
But yeah, what I'm thinking is and it sounds like you guys might know more about this and be able to find something than me. But yeah, let's get this conversation opened up, because this was a big problem on Xamarin.Forms, and we were constantly playing catch up. And there was definitely things we did, like automation IDs, that impacted this in a really severe way. And I know the teams at Olo were still able to make their apps with Xamarin, and I want to say a lot of them, if not all of them, were built in Xamarin.Forms, so they've figured it out. But this is something we should keep top of mind. I'm with you on this one. So yeah, do me a favor, shoot me an email or a direct message on Twitter, so we can so I have the contact to follow up, and I'll figure out who I know at Olo and see if I can connect you or get a moment of his or her time to at least chat about the workarounds. But I think going forward, I would love it if you're able to open up an issue in the Maui repo, and I'll kind of defer to you since you probably know more. Well, you definitely know more about it than I do, and at least start that conversation. Like, what's the Maui team focusing on in terms of accessibility? Because things like the tab index, things like voiceover, how you set those, we should be able to do that in our cross-platform Maui code. Like this is me speaking, but to me, there's no reason why we should force developers to create custom renderers. And actually, the more I'm talking about it, I think that's what Olo ended up doing, was creating a bunch of custom renderers. But we have this awesome opportunity. Let's jump on it. I love this idea, and I'll happily champion it internally.
That sounds good. So I'll show you something tomorrow. And so that certainly helps. I've been mainly doing a lot of data binding to the automation properties, help text through model and view model data binding, and I notify property change a little bit, so I can at least get multilingual accessibility requirements in place.
Whew, wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't as hard to do as you think about it, because normally people would do the automation help text as English quoted strings, right? And the whole ResX platform is all about, any text you present to the user, whether written or spoken, needs to be ready for multiple languages. So, since I'm doing a ground up app, I figured I better put that in when they say, John, let's go to Spanish. So then I'll go, oh, here's your ResX file, get your translators on it, we'll bring it in next week,
So can you use, and just asking out of, I'll say ignorance and both genuine curiosity, can you use ResX files for those voiceover strings?
All it is a string. So with the simple aspect, the automation properties help text are bindable properties. So all that matters is either I can use the static or dynamic code and just use directly go to the ResX file, or if I want a string.format capability, like I've got a phone number button, you hit it, it calls Xamarin Essentials to open up the phone dialer. I want to be able to, for iOS, it doesn't always give you the phone number. It'll just say, phone label with the name, and then you need to be able to give it the help text in the background to say phone number 651-555-1212, as opposed to phone number button, type button. So I'm trying to figure out, somebody who can't see is being asked to dial a phone number they're not being told what it is. And the same concept applies to emails or URLs or even the name of your contact with the app. So definitely get to work all that in.
Yeah. So I tell you, now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more, before opening up an issue, and I mean, if you really want to do it, I won't stop you, but maybe let's coordinate with, and if we can coordinate with some of the devs from Olo, we can probably circle up, I don't know, we'll say next week, and see like what pain points are they aware of, and we can kind of collaborate on this one issue. So it's not one of my concerns anytime I just open issues up in GitHub in general is sounding like I'm complaining about something without providing a recommended solution, because we can open up bug reports all day and be like, here's a crash report, like go figure it out. But it's more helpful if we say like, here's the reproduction so you can fix it, or here's what I recommend, or here's a pull request. But I'm thinking maybe we can circle up with the folks from Olo and get some better understanding about like what are we missing in Xamarin.Forms today that should be baked into Maui, and then we got to get a more polished we'll say spec or feature request open up in the .NET MAUI repo. But yeah, man, I love this. I I personally don't have a huge background with accessibility, but my dad does. My dad used to work at Disney World. He was the head of worldwide safety and accessibility. So it's something that it means a lot to me, and I'd be happy to champion it. Champion it internally as well. So let's do it.
Excellent. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Mm-hmm.
Nope, great question, John. Anybody else? Everything in the chat? Not seeing anything. Well, does that do it? Obviously, nope, did we have something else from somebody?
It was just background noise from Steve.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yep.
Brandon, did you have anything else that you wanted to share before we kind of just have some closing remarks, or?
No, other than just, so again, like here's the resources with all the links. Actually, I don't even know if I showed this to the team. Hang on. Had to yell at my dog for a second there. But yeah, so all the resources, so the slides, this is a previous recording, but yeah, Adam or Steve or whomever's doing the recording, let me know once the new link's live. This is a previous recording I did for a conference, but yeah, here's all the things that's new, coming soon. We didn't even talk about Xamarin.Forms 5 yet, but the spec's all available online. Everything's open source. And then with MAUI, watch this link, this deep dive with Clancy and Sweeky. This is 2 hours of doing nothing but looking at the .NET MAUI code. Again, huge caveat, we're still architecting MAUI today, and the conversations we're having on the GitHub repo will affect how it's created. So not everything in this video and not everything even we talked about today is guaranteed to be there come the fall, but I learned a ton watching this video with Clancy and Sweeky, so highly recommend it. Even though it is 2 hours, I cranked it up to 2x, 3x speed and then just powered through it, but you will learn a ton. And then if there's anybody, I think most of us here are already familiar with Xamarin, but there's all these resources like the Xamarin Show is a channel on that James Montemagno hosts. We have the On.NET Show. We've got things like Microsoft Learn. So if you have somebody new joining your team that wants to learn Xamarin.Forms, Microsoft Learn is totally free. You don't have to put a credit card down. You have to make an account, but it is all the content from Xamarin University, if you remember that. So just basically free online tutorials where you can learn to build Xamarin apps, and all this is here. So yeah, if anybody couldn't make it today, feel free to share this link with them. Pass it along. And yeah, if you have any questions you want to follow up, I am the Code Traveler on Twitter. Feel free to shoot me a message, and always happy to chat about .NET, Xamarin, mobile, GraphQL. If you're into that, those are kind of some of that's like my bat signal. If I see GraphQL, if I see Xamarin, I'm down. Let's chat.
Excellent. Well, I want to give Brandon a huge thank you and a round of applause. Thank you so much tonight.
Thank you, Brandon. Awesome job.
Yes, this was great. But yeah, everybody, thanks for hanging out. We still got almost 15 people here hanging out, more than an hour past we typically go, so that's fantastic. I will include this resource link in our kind of catch up tomorrow in the email that I send out to the group.
Thanks.
And yeah, so thank you, everybody. Thank you, ILM, for their sponsorship tonight and keeping MNEM going even during the COVID crisis with giving us the access to the Zoom account. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Take care.